All right. Good morning, everyone. Ooh, nicely done. My name is Miriam, and it is an honor to be here. On behalf of my cohort, we just want to extend a warm welcome to everybody who's able to join us today. In 1933, James Hilton, a British author and explorer, wrote a novel called Lost Horizon. In it, the protagonists are stranded in the Kunlun Mountains north of Tibet. They're rescued by monks and taken to the mythical valley of Shangri-La, which Hilton describes as a paradise on earth. At the start of my practicum journey, I was searching for this professional Shangri-La. I was fed up with the for-profits I'd worked for and underwhelmed by the nonprofits. What I had was a hunch, and that hunch was that cooperatives might be the elusive hiding place of this professional Shangri-La that I was searching for. What I didn't have was any knowledge to back up that hunch. One of the many great things about practicum is that it gives you an opportunity to jump straight into your hunches. And that is exactly what I did. There are many different types of cooperatives. Some, like the local co-op, food co-op, are consumer cooperatives. Some are marketing cooperatives, like the Best Western hotel chain. And some, like Equal Exchange, are controlled by employees. And it's these employee or worker-owned cooperatives that most caught my attention and were the focus of my practicum project. In particular, I was looking at the economic impact of worker-owned cooperatives. Here's how this presentation is going to work. First, I'm going to ask you a question. Then I'll share with you 3 of the most significant ways worker cooperatives impact the economy. I'll share with you 3 highlights from a project I became involved with at an actual worker cooperative. And then I'll ask you the same question that I started with. In the United States alone, there are over 18 million different businesses, and only 300 of them are worker-owned cooperatives. A ratio so small that it wouldn't have shown up on this pie graph unless I highlighted it, which I did, to prove a point. So here's the question I'm going to ask you to consider not once, but twice. What would the world look like if the opposite were true? Without further ado, I'm going to dive into cool thing number 1 about worker cooperatives and how they impact the economy. First, they have the potential to do something that has never been done before, and that is decouple money and power. In many worker cooperatives, there are financial investors who provide capital and expect a return. However, they don't have a vote in how that money is spent. The only people who do are the employee owners. And what this does is eliminate the ability to buy a vote or to buy a controlling share. And that is a game changer. The second little nugget I want to share with you is about worker cooperatives' ability to provide a check and balance against income disparity. You may recognize this chart behind me. It's from a study done by Duke and Harvard in 2011, and it represents the actual and the perceived and the desired distribution of wealth in this country. In 2008, after the crash, income disparity came to the forefront of American economics. And currently, there's a debate waging about minimum wage and how raising it will impact the lives of business owners, how it will impact the lives of minimum wage earners, and how that might in turn affect income disparity. Worker cooperatives take this issue and blow it out of the water and make it look like old news. And that's because employee owners can vote on the ratio of income between the highest and lowest paid employees. And many of them choose ratios that are 10 to 1 or lower. Just for reference, in 2012 at Starbucks, the ratio between the highest and the average paid employee was over 1,500 to 1. I'm not up here as a class warrior, and I'm not up here as a socialist, at least not today. But I'm up here just asking the question, what would the world look like if the majority of employees had the ability to vote on the ratio of pay within the companies in which they worked? So finally, worker cooperatives tend to provide a stabilizing influence on the economy, in particular, job security. All cooperatives exist primarily to serve the needs of their members. And in a worker cooperative, the members are the employees. And what this does is reorient the structure of the business such that its reason for existence is no longer making profit, but providing jobs by making profit. To sum it up, worker cooperatives have the ability to decouple money and power. They provide a check and balance against income disparity, and they have a stabilizing effect on the economy and the job market. I just want to check in. Does everybody remember the question? Does anybody need a refresher? Okay, great. I'm going to take you to stage 2 of my practicum now. For stage 2, I wanted to roll up my sleeves, get my hands dirty, and see what life was like day to day in an actual worker cooperative, not just on paper, but in reality. So I put out the call to all the worker cooperatives in my area. I live in Western Massachusetts. There are many worker cooperatives there. And I was offering pro bono consulting services in the areas of communication and strategy. And I said I was willing to do any project that might be helpful. I was lucky enough to get connected with Real Pickles, located in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And many of you in the room have had their pickles. Has anybody had anything from them? It's really good. But many of you are familiar with them, but just for those of you who aren't, and just because I think they're fabulous, I'm going to give you a little synopsis. In 1999, Dan Rosenberg took a class on pickling and did a lot of reading about the health benefits of raw, naturally fermented foods. And he became a pickling fanatic. 2 years later, in 2001, they launched their first commercially available product, which was dill pickles, and they made it using 1,000 pounds of local organic cucumbers. 10 years later, in 2011, Dan, his wife Addie Rose, and 3 others were pickling over 100,000 pounds of local organic vegetables every year. Last year, almost a year ago to the day, in order to keep their business small and democratically controlled and regionally relevant, they transitioned to becoming a worker cooperative. In order to fund this transition, in other words, buy out Dan and Addie Rose, they held a direct public offering, or DPO. And in this DPO, they sold non-voting Class B preferred shares to residents of Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And this method of transitioning and financing a transition to worker cooperative was absolutely novel, and no one knew if it would work. However, it was massively successful, and in 2 weeks, they had sold out, they had a waiting list, and they'd raised all the capital they hoped to. Another really interesting thing about the DPO at Real Pickles is that investors were willing to accept a lower than market rate financial return in exchange for a social and environmental return. That was another thing they didn't know if it would go over well, but it did. So this is where I came in. I worked with Addie Rose, who's a founder, she's an employee owner, and she's also the marketing director at Real Pickles, to create their first ever investor report. And this investor report had to tell the triple bottom line story. So it had to show that Real Pickles had provided a financial, an environmental, and a social return. I'm just going to share with you a few highlights from the report, just to give you a sense of what we created. And I'll let you know that the final's coming out in June, so you should keep your eye on the Real Pickles website. When we started this process, we realized we would love to be able to say Real Pickles gave a 4.2% environmental return and a 6% social return. But at this particular juncture, it would have felt forced, and it probably would have been made up. So what we had to do was come up with creative ways to represent those returns. And one thing we did was figure out how we could use images to tell the story. So we had a map of the Northeast, which you see behind me. The blue star is Real Pickles, and this represents the boundary of Real Pickles operations. Then on it, what we're doing is putting in yellow all the suppliers, all the farmers, in red all the distributors, consumers, and it gives you an image of what kind of an impact, rather than listing a quantitative return, what kind of an impact Real Pickles had in the last year. What they're also going to add to this is pounds of vegetables purchased and details like that. Next, we wanted to show that Real Pickles has been steadily adding jobs to the manufacturing industry. And in particular, we wanted to contrast that with Massachusetts' trend in losing jobs in the manufacturing industry, which it has been doing for the last 2 years. So next to this graph, what we'll show is the jobs that Real Pickles has been adding. We wanted to show that it's not just any jobs, it's high quality jobs. This wage chart is based on Franklin County, where Real Pickles is located. And as you can see, poverty wage, $5, minimum wage, $8, goes up to living wage, which is calculated on one adult, and Real Pickles starting wage, which is $11. Yesterday, I stopped by to see Dan Natty Rose, and they told me they had just voted to raise it to $12. So hot off the press. In September of 2008, the US stock market crashed. And for the years since, we've been picking up the pieces. I don't know that worker cooperatives are the professional Shangri-La I was searching for, and I don't know if it's the only place that can be found, but I can't help but wonder what the world would look like if the opposite were true. What would the world look like if the opposite were true? Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure, and I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.